Hello and welcome to this new terrain breakdown in Gaia. Today we have this green valley which has some fantasy elements in it. So as usual, let's start from our shape graph to see how it was made. I started out with a Warsland node simply because Warsland gives you a lot of rocky details as well as some lower and higher areas. As you can see, for example, here in the middle, it's lower than all the rocky shapes on the left. I only changed the scale to something like 49%. So we have more details. If you increase the scale, you will have a wider open area. After that, I connected a warp node, and as you can see, it only changed the north part of the terrain because I used a gradient as a mask. It's a very simple linear gradient, default settings. I connected it to the mask input of our warp node. So we have this kind of result here. This is before, and take a look here on the north part of the terrain. This is with the warp. I changed some setting like the size, the strength, the Z scale, and basically the higher the setting, you will get more noise along the Z axis. After that, I placed a shaper simply because I wanted a more rounded looking terrain, and I didn't really like the sharp spikes that the warp node creates. I used the same mask with the same gradient. I used an aperture node. As you can see, I simply changed it to spread method, one iteration and octagons, just to smooth out the edges and the spikes of our terrain. Then I connected an invert node to our gradient. So this is the result, just the gradient inverted. Area affected by the gradient will be the south region instead of the north region. And then I placed a shutter node connected to the aperture of before, and for the mask I used the inverted gradient. So here the northern region will be the same as before. However, our south region here, it will have this very shattered look that belongs to a rocky terrain or similar. I only changed the strength to 70%, default is I think 100. I then connected a K-ionizer to create this pit and downfall on the terrain. I changed the formation and the streamline as well as the octaves. So the octaves simply denotes the amount of noise you will get. The higher the value, the more noise you will have in the terrain. Formation is how strong the effect is overall. So in this case, it is 45%. If I increase it, you will get a lot more canyons here in this region. The streamline, I still don't understand fully how it works. I think that a lower amount means that you will get less flows on your terrain, and with flows I mean all those canyons here, like this is one flow, this is another here, one here, and so on. If you increase it, you will get more ramifications, I think, but I'm not really sure. Then I use two erosion that I combine together. The first erosion node. For this one, I think I used the slope bias 85 preset to get all these sedimentations. And for the second one, I changed the default settings to something that I liked. So I mainly changed the duration, so we get softer rocks and a more eroded base for our mountains. I lowered the strength a little bit. I also increased the downcutting. Downcutting is this effect here, basically the flow of rivers throughout the mountains. Be very careful with the setting because it is very sensitive. By default is 10%, with 15%, you will already get a strong result, as you can see from these mountains here. I also bump up the random sedimentation percentage to 30%, so we get more sedimentation around the terrain. I combine them together with a min method, 100%, and we have this kind of result here. Finally, the alluvium, just to add more deposits on our terrain. Use a very low amount, 30%, with a lot of settling. Like here, for example, we have these flows of sedimentation, which looks nice. And I also enable the drop to floor, so the terrain lies on the grid. This is it for the shape graph. Let's jump to our textures. For the textures, I placed, regarding the data nodes, this one, a texture node, which will be my main node to use the various set maps. Then the slope node, all default settings. Flow node, set to secondary flows, so we get the medium-sized flows. And the rock map. For the rock map, I unchecked the invert square here, so we get the actual rocks self, and I blur them out, 0.1, the minimum, so we get a round looking map, and also I connected an invert node in case I needed the inverted mask. Okay, so let's start. First set map, I wanted to establish the general look. It will be a green valley with some rocks. I chose a relatively greenish looking map with some dirt, as you can see here. I also reverse it. And for the second set map, I wanted a more colorful texture, so the details pop up more, especially on the mountains. I mix them together, and this is the result. As you can see, we have the green valley and the bluish colors, which looks nice for rocks or minerals, this kind of stuff. I use the max method, so we get the brightest colors popping up. For our second mixer, I simply connected my first mixer, and then I use another set map, another very colorful set map in the rock library. And the purpose of this mixer is mostly to give more variations in the terrain. As you can see, this is before, this is after. It looks more like a winter terrain, and it is also less saturated. I use the blend method, 35%. We get a mix of both colors. Another mixer. So for this one, I think it was for the rocks. I choose a very bright set map, like this one with a lot of white color, connected to the second input of the mixer. And as you can see here, for example, the rocks are way brighter and looks better. This is before, this is after. Then I simply used a mixer set to multiply to give more contrast to the terrain. And for this one, I used a green set map. We get some of our vegetation back. Oh yes, I forgot to mention that the second mixer was connected as a mask to our slope node, so only the slope at 45 degrees are affected. And our third mixer as a mask used the rock map, obviously, because I wanted to color the rocks with a more white text. For the fourth mixer as a mask, I used the inverted rock map, as you can see here. Okay, so the area affected will be the valley below, the green valley. And then for our final mixer, it is actually a combination of our white set map and a brand new set map from the blue library, which is good for water and ice. I mix them together with the blend method, 50%, so we get half and half. And this is the final result using the SQRT method, 30%. You can also use the divide or maybe multiply, depends on what kind of color you want for the rivers. And this mixer uses the flow node as a mask. If you want sedimentation or dirt, you can use a different set map and maybe use the multiply or the blend, something like that. And finally, some color correction using the color effects node. I increase the contrast, a little bit of saturation, the lightness to brighten up the terrain, 2% of hue, which means it is reddish, and a bit of equalization to avoid any artifacts. This is before, this is after the color correction. And this is the end of this terrain breakdown. So I hope you enjoyed it. If that's the case, leave a like to support the channel, subscribe to stay up to date with the latest contents. If you have any question, comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.